Part 4. The Forensic Scientist's Story. 20. So you screwed up. You left the knife sheath behind. On the bed, next to one of the blonde girls. Sloppy. What did that boxer say? All plans go out the window once you're punched in the mouth. Seems that's true for killing, too. Once the knife's plunged deep into flesh. Once the blood starts gushing. But it's not a catastrophe. You know what the science can prove. And what it can't. Science is smart. But you're smarter. It was a time for clutching at straws, for heading off in all directions. In a case where nothing seemed to make sense, there were no guardrails. Any answer seemed as logical as another. With the national media converging on Moscow and screaming for a solution, with the grieving father of one of the victims constantly voicing his dismay at the lack of progress, a besieged Chief Fry instructed Payne to send out the team to chase down all leads. Armed with their broad marching orders, the investigators went to work. They focused on the classmates of the female victims, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, frat brothers, even guys the three women had casually run into on their last night out and about. And every single alibi checked out. Still not convinced, Fry ordered they examine those stories again. Only when this second confirmation proved accurate was he at last willing to let the team move on. Yet even as they were still heading down this long, unproductive route, an indignant female FBI agent had dangled another possibility. It was sexist, as well as bad detective work, she argued, to train our attention solely on men. Women kill too, she pointed out with a well-documented reason. Why not a jealous sorority sister or an ex-bestie? And despite her obvious embarrassment, she shared an eye-opening tale from her own college days that proved her point about the fury of a woman scorned. Convinced, a small group of investigators began poking into the sororities to dig up provocative dirt. Only once again, none of it had any operational relevance. But then, widening the aperture even further, they began to look at not only co-eds, but women in the region who had been previously charged with assault. And just like that, they had something. A woman from up north with a history of violence who had come down to spend the football weekend in Moscow. Had one of the young female victims, or perhaps Ethan, done something to provoke her ire? But try as they might, they couldn't make the pieces fit into the puzzle. There was no intersection point between this suspect and any of the victims. Increasingly desperate, the team's approach turned particularly scattershot. The inquiries owed as much to wishful thinking as to insightful detective work. Although there was no evidence of sexual assault to the victims, a great deal of time was spent tracing the whereabouts on November 13th of dozens of sex offenders in both Idaho and Washington state. At the same time, the rants of a loony white supremacist who lived in a nearby town caught their attention too, and on Fry's orders they exhaustively tracked his activities on the fateful weekend. They also looked into a man who lived in an adjoining state who, a year or more earlier, had sent harassing messages to a local woman. When it was quickly determined that he had only been in Idaho twice in his life, and neither occasion was within the past 6 months, Fry was not deterred. "Keep at it," he ordered. Similarly, the comings and goings of a local who had once been accused of a knife attack were plotted, and then plotted again for good measure. And at their conclusions, every one of these inquiries inexorably led to very dead ends. Payne grew tarnished and gloomy. No longer the swaggering ex-MP Fry, desperate to keep his team's morale from flagging, would resort to pep talks and bromides that, to the more experienced state troopers and federal agents, were quickly growing tedious. "We'll get a break, you'll see," he cheered on. "You never know when it'll happen." To which one fed-up trooper, albeit when out of earshot, had sneered, "You're right. You never will know." But as Fry had predicted, just when the team least expected it, they caught a break. Only problem was, they didn't realize it. 5 days after the murders, the Moscow PD issued still another request for help, but the specificity in this appeal gave it more bite. Moscow detectives are seeking help from residents and businesses within the area of the King Roadhouse who have video surveillance at their residence or business between 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. on Sunday, November 13th, 2022. The overnight assistant manager, her name at her request remains secret, for a gas station on Troy Road, not far from the house on King Road, read this notice and swiftly decided to help. This was her town, and the killer was on the loose, and so she felt she had a duty. She had not been working the night of the murders, but nevertheless she spent the downtime on her graveyard shift reviewing the videos that had been recorded by the station's surveillance cameras on November 13th. "I had a weird feeling," she later said. Over the course of a long night, she intermittently kept at it. It was painstaking work, and at first she found nothing. Then, just before she was to wrap up her shift, the shadowy video revealed a small treasure. She spotted a white car speeding down Highway 8 before turning down a side street. The time was close to 4:30 a.m., and that was very much in the window the detectives were exploring. She took a screenshot of the footage and emailed it to the tip line address. Later that day, a Moscow police officer appeared at the gas station to confiscate hours of surveillance footage. The quality of the images was taxing. They were flickering, recorded in varying light. At first glance, all that could be said for sure was that the pixels had captured a fast-moving white car. But it was a puzzle that held their attention. They kept at it, and in the end they had something. Sure, they were unable to penetrate through the dark shadows enveloping the car's windshield to make out the face behind the wheel, and the license plate was out of the camera's shot. Nevertheless, on November 19th, the team had made an important deduction. The killer had fled in a 2019 to 2023 white Nissan Sentra. Armed at last with what they felt confident was a propitious lead, they once again charged off. Only they were headed in the wrong direction. The identification of the vehicle had been wrong. Inspired by the service station video, an industrious detective reached out on a hunch to Kane Francetish. Recently retired, Francetish was now investing in real estate. As part of his portfolio, he owned a 6-unit rental complex on Linda Lane, about 3/10 of a mile from where the bodies had been found. And there was a surveillance camera fixed to the building's roof. Francetish was a friendly, easygoing guy, eager to cooperate. "I downloaded the rooftop camera and gave them access to everything from 2 a.m. through noon on that Sunday the 13th, he said. The tapes reconfirmed a good deal of what the investigators had first seen on the gas station video. There it was, the same white car, and once again it appeared to be making a breakneck getaway through the dark King Road neighborhood streets at about 4:20 a.m. But they now realized they had a problem. They were no longer so sure the vehicle was a Nissan. From this new angle, it certainly didn't look like one, and after a while they conceded they were stumped. They were unable to determine the model of the car. And without any idea of the make of the car, its year, or for that matter, its license plate number, or a look at the driver, they were back at square one.